This is a spoiler warning for Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. I really enjoyed the first Aquaman movie. I think it's a solid action adventure, and sure it's not perfect, but it's fun. So going into Aquaman 2 or Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, I was ready. I was game. I didn't go into it with a critical or cynical mindset thinking, oh, let's just get this over with. This is the final piece of garbage the DCEU has to vomit out before we reboot it. Let's just get it done. No, I was actually looking forward for this movie because I genuinely, sincerely enjoyed the first Aquaman, and I had faith in James Wan. I like the Conjuring films, he delivers with them, so I thought he was gonna deliver with this one. I really thought this would be such a bang, and that it'd be a maximalist, explosive ride like the first movie. And even if it didn't turn out great, story-wise, I was still so sure it was going to be at the very least a fun way to end the DCEU. And having seen it, well, girl, let's talk about it. Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom is finally here, directed by James Wan. This is the final film in the DCEU, and it's also the last superhero film for 2023, which, by the way, hasn't exactly been the kindest year for entries in the genre. And from the looks of it, it seems like Aquaman 2 is joining the many superhero flops of the year, both critically and financially. Which, I think that's fair. This movie deserves it. Now let's dive into why. The movie is 2 hours and 40 minutes long, which isn't that long, right? That's like a good length for a movie. But oh my lord, does the first half of this movie feel so long and boring and tedious and just so slow. Things happen, sure, but it feels like nothing's happening at the same time. And I don't have anything against slow films. I'm not mad at slowness because slowness and pacing doesn't always mean boring. There are plenty of slow films that are not boring that I love, but the first half of this movie, it is both slow and boring. And I'm going to tell you why that is. I'm going to explain why that is. But first, this is the basic plot summary of the film. Arthur is king of Atlantis now, and he's married and has a baby, which is great. Meanwhile, Black Manta, looking for revenge on Arthur, accidentally discovers the Black Trident, and basically gets possessed by its owner, Kordax. Ooh. Kordax, possessing Black Manta's body, wants to unleash his old kingdom, Necrus, so he could regain his full power and take over or destroy the world. So Aquaman has to stop him, naturally. That's it. Now let me tell you why the first half of the movie is so boring. Most of the conflict and the action is happening underwater, but the movie never establishes anything that we should care about underwater. Yes, the movie starts by setting up Arthur as a father. He's happily married now and he has a child and he loves his family. Great, I love that. But that's on land. Arthur cares about his baby, so we too care about the baby. When that baby gets kidnapped later on, the movie finally starts feeling a bit, only a bit, exciting. But for the first half, there is nothing the movie establishes for us to care about in Atlantis. And this is very important because so much of the film is about saving and protecting Atlantis. You have to save and protect Atlantis and the world. But those two stakes are so big and so abstract that we just end up not caring. They don't feel real. When Atlantis is attacked, I don't care. Atlantis is just the kingdom that Arthur supposedly rules. I don't know anything about it. I barely know the people living there, and the movie barely shows Arthur caring about the people. You could say that Arthur cares about Mera and Atlanna, but that's just implicit, and the movie never does any work to make that feel concrete. The movie never uses them that way, and even when Mera's life was in danger, it doesn't really hit as much because the movie feels like it's actively trying to give Mera as little screen time as possible, so Arthur's marriage and love for Mera isn't that well established in the movie, and how much he cares for her is just barely depicted. He gets hit by a giant blast and, gets hurt really bad, and it feels like Arthur doesn't really care that much. I mean, they show that he does, but only very briefly. So really, it feels like there's nothing underwater that Arthur cares about, and by extension, there's nothing underwater that we, the audience, are allowed to ever care about. There's a plot line in this movie involving a plague in Atlantis. Apparently, because of the things that the bad guy is doing, plagues are coming to Atlantis, and I think that's a great concept. It's executed badly. That could have really improved the movie if it actually showed the plague and not just talked about it. It's all just discussed, especially since Volko died of that plague. That could have helped this movie a lot if they showed that, Volko suffering and dying from the plague. That would have given so much fire for Arthur's motivation to save his kingdom, and it would have allowed the audience to better understand the stakes in the movie. Even if it wasn't Volko, just show Arthur visiting random Atlantean people who are suffering with a plague. And again, not just talk about it. Film is a visual medium, and one of the most important rules about storytelling in all forms of media, not just films, is show don't tell. Imagine if there was a scene of Arthur going to a camp of Atlantean people suffering from that plague, so he sees how terrible this whole thing has affected Atlantis. We need a scene like that because we as the audience need to see not only why Arthur needs to stop the bad guy, but also why we should care about him stopping the bad guy. People of Atlantis are suffering. Oh no, people are dying. There we go. I care, at the very least, even for just a bit. I would care about Atlantis and whether or not Arthur succeeds now, seeing the repercussions of the bad guy's actions. But nothing to that effect is ever shown in the movie. Although I do still think it would be more effective if we actually saw Volko suffering the plague and dying. He is Aquaman's mentor, and I don't know about you, but I really liked Volko. Watching him die would have really endeared me towards Arthur even more, I think. So yeah, there's nothing to that effect in the first half of the film. Atlantis gets attacked, and there's destruction shown, but it's all abstract destruction. Atlantis is what's at stake for the entire first half of the film, and the movie doesn't give us any chance to know about Atlantis, and by extension, any reason to care about it. I mean, in the first Aquaman, we cared because Arthur had a great life in the human world with his dad, and he loved his dad, they were happy. And Orm literally threatens to destroy the human world and kill Arthur's dad. We had stakes, we had things we cared about at risk. And you may notice how I'll be comparing this film to the first Aquaman a lot while I do this review. So let me just say ahead, I'm not saying that this movie, Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, I'm not saying it's bad because it's different from the first Aquaman film. Not at all. I'm saying the movie is bad. Period. It's boring, not because it's different from the first Aquaman movie, but because it lacks a lot of solid stakes, especially in the first half, lacks any form of solid narratives for its characters, and has visuals and direction choices that would just be bad in any movie. And I'm only bringing up the first Aquaman to point out that, hey, they knew about stakes in the first film, and they had good fights and nice visuals. What happened here? Another thing that they also did in the first half was that because of all of the plagues and catastrophes and the destruction, Arthur's position as king was at stake. Like, they bring that up. They were like, ooh, Arthur could be replaced as king. And I almost thought like, oh no, like I thought that would be a problem. I was worried. But no, they just say it. Nothing ever comes of it. And I realized I never actually worried after it was brought up because Arthur himself doesn't really feel like being king is important to him. So there, another stake to not care about. I mean, it would have brought a lot more excitement to the film if there were people actually trying to bring Arthur down from being king because they're disappointed with his rule and they try to usurp the throne. That would have made the film less boring and maybe be the catalyst that pushes Arthur into becoming a better king for Atlantis. But no, that doesn't happen. They just say Arthur could lose his position as king, and that's it. They even bring up later on how Arthur never wanted to be king. He was just forced to fight Orm because Orm was threatening to destroy the human world. I thought that would mean character development for Arthur, like he would finally step into wanting to be king, but no. He kinda does, but I don't know. I really liked Arthur's arc from the first Aquaman. He was happy, living in the human world with his dad, who he loved, and he was reluctantly pulled into the role of having to fight his own brother and be some type of hero for Atlantis and to be its king, when really he just wanted to keep his dad alive and the human world safe. He had to step up and become someone he never wanted to be for the sake of duty. I actually cried watching the first Aquaman. Granted, I was in a lot of stress and I was suffering with sleep deprivation, but in that scene, when he was confronting the giant Julie Andrews monster, I remember just sobbing quietly in the theater because I related to his character and saw myself in his struggles. Which, yeah, is weird, I know, but what I'm trying to say is that at least Arthur in the first Aquaman had a solid arc for his character and went on a relatively solid journey. I can't say the same for this movie. Not that they don't try, they do try to give Arthur something, but they fall flat. By the way, if you're enjoying this video, please consider leaving a like or giving a subscribe. I'm a small YouTube channel and that would help me out a lot. Thanks! The only time I was worried or emotionally engaged at all in the first half of the movie was when Nicole Kidman got hit in the head really hard, and I only cared because she's Nicole Kidman. And it doesn't help that the action set pieces in this movie, especially in the first half, are not as good as those from the first film. And that really bummed me too because I wasn't expecting a great story from this film, I was expecting an okay story, but I was really expecting great fight set pieces that exceeded or matched the fights in the first one because those were really fun. And they don't. Actually, most of the visual aspects of this movie don't exceed or let alone reach the level of the first Aquaman. The CGI here is not as good. The cinematography I don't think is as good. The fight choreo is not as good. And I mean, you know, fight scenes don't always have to have stakes. They can just be cool, fun fight scenes with great fight choreo. But that's not the case here. There are barely any stakes in the fights, and the fights are just not fun. So what do you have? Let me describe one set piece in the film that should not be boring. Aquaman, now with a cool new suit that makes him invisible, has to go to a desert prison guarded by blood-sucking creatures that were once fish, but evolved to survive in the extreme heat outside the water, to rescue Orm, the brother he beat and whose throne he took, aided by a fun, big octopus friend. Come on! Invisibility suit, octopus friend, blood-sucking vampire fish creatures? Yeah! But no, the film manages to make it boring. I don't know how. And I have to bring that up because all of those elements, the CGI, the visuals, the fights, they were so fun and so special in the first movie. The visuals were over the top and they had so much personality. The camera movements during the fights in that first movie, insane. The first Aquaman was a maximalist underwater fever dream and I really loved it so much as a maximalist myself. This movie tries to be that, but it just ends up being an incoherent mess. But I do have to point out, the movie feels like it forgets all of the things that made the first Aquaman movie good in its first half, and then it gets somewhat jolted awake and remembers some of it in the second half. It's like, oh right, this is what we do. Like, once Aquaman and Orm invade Black Manta's lair the first time, it feels like, oh right, we have to have good cinematography and good fight scenes. It feels like it remembers some of that. I don't know, it feels like someone else directed the first half of this film. I wouldn't be surprised if actually the first half was heavily reshot or reworked. The cool fights with fun camera movements do exist in this movie, but it's only in 1 or 2 fights and really not as fun as the ones in the first. And I know I'm talking a lot of crap about the first half of this movie, but it's not like the second half is good enough to save it either. No, the second half just at least feels like it has some spirit and some energy, and it does have a really cool stake with the baby, but even then it's still just, ugh. It finally feels like something's happening when they all realize that the baby's in danger, and there's a sequence that could have been great with Arthur's father and the baby in the lighthouse. You know, it sets up a scary atmosphere. We have a baby we care about, the evil, powerful bad guy trying to kidnap the baby so he could kill the baby. That's scary. And the only line of defense we have for the baby is Arthur's dad, who is a normal, regular human. James Wan uses his horror background to set up this really intense and frightening scene. I was gearing up, then Black Manta arrives, and then we cut. Like, there is no fun sequence where Arthur's dad desperately tries but fails to protect the baby. It's only a setup of that sequence, but we cut away from ever seeing that sequence. That could have been a very interesting scene, but nope. And so for the finale of the film, we have 2 stakes, right? The baby, which is very personal, and the world. The movie only really puts in the work to make us care about the baby, but it just doesn't execute that well enough. Because first of all, the movie never makes you feel like the baby could actually die, and second of all, once the baby's saved, we're back to feeling like there are no stakes again. And at no point does Arthur also ever feel like he's actually worried he could lose his child. He looks and feels the same way he felt all throughout the film. He doesn't feel more emotionally vulnerable or worried now than he did earlier. So why should I worry? And Arthur even says that in the movie, that he uses his comedy to cover up his worries and his emotions. He says that in the movie. And while that's good and could actually work, in this film it just feels like a lazy excuse. There are brief scenes showing Arthur worry about Mera when she was attacked, and scenes showing Arthur worried about the baby when the baby was kidnapped. They were barely scenes, and you never get to feel just how worried he actually is, so you never get a sense of how important these people are to him. I mean, when the baby gets kidnapped, it could have been such an emotionally resonant scene, but I just laughed because for some reason, they decided to shoot it like it's a melodramatic soap opera with like a stupid slow-mo effect and like a fade to black while Arthur was screaming. I laughed, I just laughed. It could have been a great scene. Why show it like that? Why are you afraid of Aquaman showing emotions, James Wan? And why did you shoot that scene like that? Remember that first Spider-Man movie where Aunt May got attacked by Green Goblin, so Peter rushes worriedly to the hospital and it's actually played with intensity and like a lot of emotion? That's not the way it is here. I only partly cared when the baby gets kidnapped because everyone else looks very worried. Mera, in the scraps of screen time she was given, really brought in the emotion of what it feels like to worry about potentially losing your child. But then again, she's only briefly in the movie and barely a character, which is, I think, a stupid choice and a wasted opportunity. Mera at least looks and feels like she's really pissed off at the villain for taking her child. Also, using the baby as a stake to make the conflict seem more personal just feels stupid now in this movie because the villain's motivation in kidnapping the baby isn't even revenge, it's just to break some stupid magic seal. That's much less exciting and less dramatic than just wanting to kill the baby out of hate and anger. Black Manta is so wasted in this movie. He's possessed most of the way through, so it's really not him. The movie says stuff like, oh, his hatred for Arthur is fueling the bad guy, but really no. The bad guy possesses Black Manta. The bad guy's motive is to heat the world up so he could be free and be evil and rule the world or whatever, and Arthur just happens to be on his way. It could have been so much better and have been more impactful if it was just Black Manta, you know? Doing all types of villainous stuff just to hurt Aquaman. There's just more emotional resonance there if it was all about hate and revenge. Here it's just a generic villain who wants to destroy the world. I mean, Black Manta, he was such a hater in the first movie. He just hated Aquaman, and that would have been so much more personal and so much more emotionally resonant. Now there's Orm, too, in this movie that I want to talk about, but then they don't really do much with him. They made a big deal out of saying this movie was going to focus on the relationship of the brothers, but no, not really. I mean, yeah, it gives the focus on the relationship of the two brothers by giving them screen time together, but does it really give their relationship a meaningful, memorable, and interesting arc? No, they don't do much with it. They don't even look like they really hate each other that much at the start. I like the relationship the brothers have for sure. I really enjoy them together, but like, it wasn't that interesting. It was for a bit when Orm was like, oh, so you never wanted to be king? My dad always told me you were coming to take my throne. And Aquaman was like, no, I only fought you because you tried to kill my dad and destroy my world. That was interesting, but then they don't do anything else with it. But hey, at least I got to see Patrick Wilson, because, you know, good lord, that's a man. Anyway, I was really disappointed by this movie. The story was not it, but more importantly, the fights, the visuals, they were not it. I was bored. The DCEU is over now. I really thought we'd have this big, fun movie to end it on, but no, we have this. Aquaman of the Lost Kingdom. Not a bang, but a messy, wet fart. I am out.